Before we begin, make sure you hit that like button, drop a comment with your favorite part of today's story, and subscribe so you never miss another tale where humanity surprises the galaxy. Your support helps us keep bringing you these cinematic adventures. Now let's begin. The chamber of the Galactic Council was carved into a crescent of obsidian stone, every surface polished to a mirror sheen. Rows of delegates leaned forward in their seats, antennae twitching, scaled tails flicking, wings folding tight with unease. The air vibrated with tension as the Chancellor's voice rolled out like distant thunder. We convene today for a matter that cannot be ignored. Across 3 star systems, apex predators, creatures who have never bowed to another, are entrusting their newborns to humans. Gasps cut through the hall high and sharp. On the wide holoscreen above, images flickered. A human soldier crouched low in a jungle clearing, nursing a razor-fanged cub with a battered canteen. A colony child calmly stroking the spines of a hatchling whose bite could shear through steel. A farmer lifting a predator pup from the wreckage of a storm, his face weathered but serene. Whispers rippled like fire through dry grass. The delegates were not horrified at the cubs, they were horrified at the humans. They should not be able to do this, one hissed, a crystalline envoy whose people had studied predator behavior for centuries. Instinct forbids such trust. Even the cubs' own sires risked their lives when approaching too soon. And yet, the Chancellor replied, eyes narrowing, humans are not attacked. They are accepted. From the far side of the hall, a figure stirred. Tall, shoulders draped in a mantle of bone-white fur, his frame built for violence. The counselors nearest him shifted uneasily, for his scent was sharp with iron and storm. His name was Reltar, a male of the Kelry apex lineage, predators who could silence forests with a single roar. His crimson eyes glinted beneath the light. You speak as if this is an aberration, he growled, voice thick with gravel. But to me it is necessity. The chamber hushed. For all their power, few dared speak so plainly in the council. The Chancellor inclined her head. Necessity? Reltar's claws flexed against the armrest of his seat. My mate is dead. My clan is fractured. My daughter. His gaze flicked downward to the small bundle pressed against his chest. Swaddled in scaled cloth was a cub, no larger than a human toddler, her breathing uneven, her tiny claws clinging to his mantle. My daughter will not survive without aid. And my people will not give it. A murmur of disbelief surged through the chamber. Predators did not show their offspring, not here, not before strangers. To reveal weakness was to invite challengers. Yet Reltar did not flinch. His chest rose and fell like a war drum. I have studied the reports, he continued. The humans do what we cannot. They place themselves between danger and the helpless without hesitation. They tend wounds, feed mouths not their own, and demand nothing in return. If there is a being in this galaxy who can save her, it is a human. Blasphemy, spat a counselor, mandibles clacking. You would deliver the heir of your line to an unpredictable species? A species that fights wars against themselves for sport? They are chaos wrapped in fragile flesh. Chaos, Reltar said slowly, that guards the young with a fury greater than kinship. The Chancellor's gaze softened as she studied the cub. Her delicate hands trembled before she folded them in her lap. And what will you do if they betray your trust? Reltar's lip curled in a half-snarl, half-smile. Then the stars themselves will burn with my vengeance. No one doubted him. The chamber fell into a silence so taut it could snap. The council weighed centuries of law and instinct against the image before them. The deadliest predator in the known galaxy, holding a cub against his heart, speaking not of conquest but of trust. Finally the Chancellor spoke. We cannot forbid your journey. But if you take this path you do so at your own peril. Should the human fail, your line ends with her. Reltar inclined his head, a predator bowing not in submission but in resolve. So be it. He rose, mantle falling across his broad back, and strode from the chamber. Behind him, the cub whimpered softly, and the sound was more terrifying to the counselors than any roar. Later, in the quiet of his warship, Reltar stood before the viewport. Stars stretched endlessly, their cold fire mirrored in his eyes. The cub shifted in her sleep, clutching his claw with her tiny hand. His chest ached, not from fear of enemies, but from the knowledge that no blade, no battle, no fortress could protect her as she needed. His kin would call him mad. His enemies would scent weakness. But still he set a course for the small blue world humans called Earth. As the engines roared to life, Reltar whispered to the stars, his words a vow as much as a prayer. Live, little one. Whatever it takes, live. The ship cut through the dark, carrying with it a father's desperate gamble and the fragile hope of a cub whose survival now rested in human hands. And somewhere on Earth, unaware of the storm racing toward him, a human medic prepared for another quiet day, never guessing that the universe's fiercest predator was coming to his door with the most precious cargo imaginable. The journey had begun. The cabin stood at the edge of a vast pine forest, its timbers darkened by rain and years of quiet endurance. A thin trail of smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the faint smell of herbs and boiled broth. Inside, Dr. Elias Grant worked with the steady precision of a man who had long ago learned to live in silence. His hands, scarred and calloused, stitched together the torn wing of a kestrel while the bird shivered under a warming lamp. He hummed softly, a soundless tune that steadied his breathing as much as the creature's. Elias was not old, but war had carved years into his posture. His hair, dark and clipped short, showed streaks of early gray at the temples. A faint limp marked his stride, though he ignored it as he ignored many aches. He had once been the kind of soldier who ran into fire for the wounded, and though he had put down the uniform, he carried the habits with him. Now he tended to whatever broken life arrived at his door: wild animals, stranded travelers, even the occasional alien who had braved the isolation of his chosen retreat. When the kestrel was stable, he stepped outside, breathing in the crisp air. The world was quiet here, but he never mistook quiet for safety. He scanned the tree line, always watching, always prepared. Abbott again. His gaze caught a glint in the sky, faint against the daylight. He frowned, eyes narrowing. The glint grew brighter, swelling into a streak that burned against the horizon. He recognized controlled descent, the kind of entry used by ships heavy with armor. His jaw clenched. Very few visitors came to this wilderness, and those who did rarely arrived in ships like that. He returned inside and checked the contents of his medkit. Bandages, stimulants, analgesics, stocked and ready. Then he reached under the table, drew out a blade sheathed in worn leather, and set it against his belt. Elias Grant had lived long enough to know that visitors rarely brought peace. The ground shuddered with the force of a landing. Animals in the woods cried out, wings beating the sky in panicked flight. He waited, heart steady, until the knock came, not on the door but like thunder against the earth. Heavy steps pressed into the soil, drawing closer. When the doorframe shook beneath the weight of a fist, Elias opened it without hesitation. The being on the threshold filled the doorway. Reltar loomed like a nightmare from a soldier's fever dream, towering, shoulders broad, a mantle of white fur streaked with dust from travel. His crimson eyes burned with feral intensity. In his arms he cradled something wrapped in cloth, fragile against the mass of his body. Elias did not move at first. He studied the predator with calm scrutiny, not fear. Then his gaze drifted to the bundle. A cup. Small, weak breath ragged. The faint sound of its whimper pierced the air between them. Reltar's voice rumbled like distant thunder. Human. Heal her. Elias's hand tightened on the doorframe. The weight of that demand was not lost on him. Bring her inside. The predator hesitated, instincts clawing at him. To step into another's den, to surrender his cub into strange hands, it defied every law of his bloodline. But the cub whimpered again, and the great warrior bowed his head low enough to enter. Elias cleared a space on the table, sweeping instruments aside. He motioned with his hand. Lay her here. Reltar lowered the bundle, his claws trembling as they released their grip. He hovered, shoulders tense, every muscle ready to strike if harm came. The cloth peeled back to reveal a creature with soft fur along her crown, scales glistening faintly along her arms. Her chest rose shallowly as though each breath cost too much. Elias leaned close, listening. Her lungs rattled, her skin burned with fever. He touched her gently, checking pulse, examining eyes. His movements were practiced, efficient, entirely without fear. Dehydration, he murmured. Possible infection. She hasn't eaten properly. Reltar growled low. Fix it. Elias met his eyes, calm and unshaken. I will. But you must follow my lead. No snarling, no sudden movements. You frighten her more than the sickness does. The predator bared his teeth, insulted by the notion. Yet when the cub whimpered again, he dropped his gaze, silenced by her fragile cry. Elias worked quickly. He prepared a mixture of fluids, coaxing the cub to sip. He wrapped her in warmer cloths, pressed herbs to her fevered skin. Reltar hovered close, torn between fear and rage, his claws gouging the wood of the table. But he did not interfere. You've carried her far, Elias said quietly as he worked. Longer than she should have survived, considering her state. Reltar's voice cracked with something between pride and grief. I carried her across stars. Through storms. Through silence. My mate is gone. My kin would let her die. But I will not. Elias glanced at him once, then back to the cub. Then we are alike. The words hung heavy. For the first time Reltar studied the human, not just his hands steady as stone but his eyes. They carried the weight of countless losses, the burden of one who had also refused to let the helpless perish. The cub finished sipping the fluid and gave a faint chirr, a sound like soft static. Elias adjusted her wrappings, murmuring low as he did, words meant more for comfort than understanding. She nuzzled weakly into his palm. Something shifted in the air. Reltar's claws flexed, but not in aggression. His instincts screamed that this was wrong. No cub should accept a stranger. Yet his daughter pressed herself into the human's hand with trust as natural as breathing. Elias looked up. She's strong. She'll fight. But she needs care and it won't be easy. You'll have to help me. Reltar straightened, towering again, but his voice was quieter now. Tell me what to do. The human gave simple instructions. Fetch water, steady the cloths, adjust the lamp. Reltar obeyed, every motion awkward, his claws ill-suited to such delicate tasks. But he obeyed nonetheless, driven by desperation. Night fell. Shadows thickened across the cabin, firelight casting both man and predator in flickering glow. The cub's breathing eased, faint but steadier. Elias leaned back, exhausted but satisfied. She'll live, he said at last. The words broke something inside Reltar. His knees bent, lowering him beside the table, shoulders trembling. He had roared across battlefields, torn enemies limb from limb, faced storms that swallowed fleets. But this moment undid him more than war ever had. Elias looked at him, not with pity but with quiet recognition. You don't have to thank me. Just stay still. Let her rest. The predator bowed his head, his mantle falling forward to shield his eyes. For the first time in his life he surrendered, not to an enemy but to the fragile truth before him. The cabin was silent save for the crackle of the fire and the steady breath of a cub who had found, against every law of instinct and every fear of the galaxy, safety in a human's care. And outside the forest stirred. Somewhere beyond the tree line shadows moved, drawn by the scent of weakness and the rumor of forbidden trust. But for now, inside the small cabin, a fragile alliance had taken root. A predator and a human, bound by the survival of a single child, stood on the edge of something greater than either could yet imagine. The night was not done with them. The storm rolled in without thunder, a silent weight that pressed against the walls of the cabin. Elias noticed it first, not in the clouds but in the way the forest grew quiet. Birds that should have been calling fell silent, and even the wind seemed to retreat. He set down the mortar he had been using to grind herbs and moved to the window. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, steady eyes searching the tree line. Reltar sat in the corner, cradling his cub against his chest, his claws gently adjusting the cloth that Elias had wrapped her in earlier. His massive frame filled the shadows like a monument, but there was no ease in his posture. He too sensed the shift in the air. They come, he murmured, his voice more vibration than sound. Elias did not ask who. He had seen enough wars to recognize the heaviness of a hunted night. How many? Reltar tilted his head, nostrils flaring. His fur bristled, the ridge along his back rising in response to a scent only he could detect. More than two. Less than a horde. They are kin but not of my house. Scavengers of honor. They smell her weakness. Elias exhaled slowly. He had hoped the forest's isolation would keep danger away longer, but desperation always found a way. Then we hold here. He moved quickly, his body carrying the muscle memory of a soldier. He swept aside chairs, stacked them against the door and pulled down canvas bundles from a shelf. Inside were the tools of survival. Wire, stakes, small canisters marked with faded symbols. Reltar watched, suspicion warring with curiosity. You build traps, the predator said. Deterrence, Elias corrected, stringing a wire low across the front entrance. I'm not trying to kill them. Just slow them long enough to make them reconsider. They will not reconsider. Reltar's growl vibrated the rafters. They will take her or they will die. Elias paused, tying the wire taut, then looked back at him. Then let's make sure neither happens. Reltar bared his teeth, but the human's calm refusal to yield stilled his tongue. He lowered his gaze to the cub, who stirred softly in his arms, then laid her gently in the cradle Elias had improvised from blankets and timber. The moment his claws left her, his body shifted, shoulders rolling, claws flexing. He was ready for war. Night deepened. The fire in the hearth burned low, shadows lengthening along the walls. Elias crouched by the window, knife sheathed at his hip, his fingers wrapped around a small cylinder that hissed faintly with pressure. Outside, the forest stirred again. Branches cracked. Leaves whispered. The first shadow slipped into view, tall and narrow, eyes glinting with reflected light. Another followed, bulkier, its outline jagged with spines. Then more. They circled like wolves, patient and silent. Elias whispered without turning his head, "How many?" Reltar inhaled deeply, then let out a low growl that shook the cabin floor. 7. 7 it is. Elias rose and pulled the pin on the canister. Smoke burst outward, thick and acrid, seeping through the cracks in the shutters. The forest figures hesitated, momentarily disoriented. Then the assault began. The door shuddered under the force of a blow. Wood splintered, dust raining from the beams. Reltar moved to the threshold with a snarl, his roar splitting the night into pieces. The predators outside recoiled but did not retreat. They hammered again, claws ripping at the frame. Elias slipped out the back, moving with silent efficiency. He pulled another canister free and tossed it wide, the hiss filling the undergrowth with choking fog. A shadow lunged at him, its silhouette barely visible. He dropped low, blade flashing upward in a controlled arc. The creature howled, retreating with blood dark against its scales. Elias did not chase. He never chased. His only goal was to buy time. Inside, Reltar burst through the front door as it collapsed inward. He met the raiders with a fury that shook the earth, his claws raking, his fangs sinking deep. Two fell instantly, torn aside as if they were nothing more than kindling. But for every one he threw down, another pressed forward, their eyes fixed not on him, but on the cub inside the cabin. Elias returned in time to see one slip past the fray, its body low, its stride silent. Without hesitation he tackled it before it crossed the threshold. The impact rattled his bones, but he drove his blade into its side, twisting until the predator shrieked and stumbled back into the night. Reltar's roar shook the treetops. He fought with the desperation of a father, every strike fueled by the knowledge that failure meant extinction. Elias fought with the precision of a medic-turned-soldier, each movement calculated to protect, to shield, to hold the line. Different instincts, one purpose. The attackers regrouped, circling again, their numbers thinned but not broken. Blood soaked the earth, smoke clung to the trees, the scent of violence heavy in the air. Elias wiped his blade clean against his sleeve, his breath steady despite the pounding in his chest. "They'll come again," he said quietly. Reltar stood tall, his fur matted, his claws dripping, his chest heaving like a furnace. "Then they will die again." Elias glanced back into the cabin. The cub slept, untouched, her tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with the crackle of the dying fire. That sight alone made the ache in his ribs worth it. The predators outside did not vanish into the forest. Their shapes lingered at the edges of the smoke, waiting, watching. They had tested the defenses and found resistance. Now they measured resolve. Elias tightened the grip on his knife, eyes fixed on the darkness. Reltar stepped forward, shoulders squared, his voice carrying like a vow. "They will not have her." The night air trembled with the promise of more violence. Yet inside the small cabin, human and predator stood side by side, guardians of a life that neither would surrender. The raiders would return, hungrier and angrier, but for now the line had held. And as the forest grew still again, Elias knew this was only the beginning. The night did not relent. Hours stretched into a tense silence, broken only by the distant shuffle of movement in the forest. Smoke drifted low across the clearing, clinging to the trees like a veil. Elias sat at the table sharpening his knife in measured strokes, the rasp of steel against stone steadying his thoughts. Beside him, the cub slept under the soft glow of the lamp, her breaths less ragged now, her body warm beneath the layers of cloth. Across the room Reltar paced like a caged storm. His wounds leaked where claws had cut him, yet he paid them no mind. Every few strides he would stop to stare at the doorway, muscles rippling, then resume his restless march. "They will come again," he said, his voice a growl low in his throat. Elias glanced up, calm despite the certainty of the threat. "Of course they will. But next time they won't be testing. They'll be committing." The predator's eyes narrowed. "And you are not afraid?" "I've been afraid plenty of times," Elias replied, sliding the blade back into its sheath. "It doesn't change what has to be done." The words settled into the air like stones in water. Reltar halted his pacing, studying the human with a gaze both wary and searching. He had fought alongside warriors who would kill for glory, for dominance, for bloodlines. Never had he met one who fought without expectation, without kinship, for a cub not his own. Outside, the forest stirred again. The attackers had regrouped. Shadows flickered between the trees, more deliberate now, less cautious. Elias rose and moved to the door, scanning the treeline. Reltar joined him, shoulders tense, claws flexed. The first cry came like a blade splitting the night. A figure darted forward, then another, then a flood. They surged toward the cabin, eyes glinting with hunger and fury. Elias stepped into position, the traps reset, wires taut, smoke canisters ready. Reltar roared and charged, the earth trembling beneath his stride. The clash was immediate. Predators slammed against predator, claws scraping, teeth snapping. Reltar was a force of raw power, his strikes tearing through the first wave. Elias moved with precision, releasing smoke that blinded, throwing flash charges that cracked the air with sudden light. The attackers stumbled, but still they pressed forward. One broke through, lunging straight for the cub. Elias intercepted, knife flashing in a blur of motion. He caught the raider across the chest, forcing it back with a strike meant not for death but for warning. His stance was unyielding, his eyes hard. "You don't touch her." The raider hesitated, instincts conflicted. The cub, sensing the tension, whimpered. Elias reached back with his free hand, resting it gently on her tiny form without breaking his gaze from the intruder. The gesture was protective, absolute. The cub quieted, pressing against him as though she knew no harm could reach her there. Something rippled through the attackers. They faltered, their advance stuttering as their instincts betrayed them. To see a cub at ease in the presence of an alien species, to see her calm where she should have been terrified, it gnawed at the deepest part of their predator minds. Reltar seized the moment, his roar shaking the trees. "Look at her," he bellowed, blood dripping from his claws. "Look how she rests in the human's arms. Would she do this for you? Would she trust you so?" The raiders froze. Their snarls quieted, their claws lowered by degrees. The fight had been about dominance, about seizing a weakness. But the cub's acceptance of Elias shattered the logic of their instincts. A cub that did not cry out in fear but nestled closer. This was no weakness. This was something beyond them. Elias stood unmoving, the cub tucked gently against his chest, her breathing steady against the thrum of his heart. His voice was calm but carried like iron. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me. And you won't succeed." The words were not shouted, yet they cut deeper than any roar. The raiders stepped back, uncertain, caught between rage and the primal truth written in the cub's calm. One spat on the ground, backing into the shadows. Another followed. One by one, the circle broke, their growls fading as they retreated into the smoke-choked forest. Not defeated by force alone, but by a truth their instincts could not deny: the human was protector, not prey. The clearing fell silent. The firelight from the cabin flickered across torn earth and broken branches. Reltar stood breathing heavily, his chest heaving, his claws dripping with the fight's remnants. He turned toward Elias, who was already settling the cub back into her blankets, his touch precise, gentle, unwavering. For a long moment, the predator said nothing. His instincts warred within him, 1,000 generations of law screaming that what had just happened was impossible. Yet the evidence lay before him. His daughter, safe, breathing, calm in the hands of a human. At last, Reltar lowered his head, his voice rough with something he rarely allowed himself to feel. "No one has ever done what you have done. Not my kin. Not even me." Elias adjusted the blankets and met his gaze without flinching. "A child's life isn't a burden. It's a duty. Doesn't matter whose blood runs in her veins." The predator's jaw tightened, his crimson eyes burning with an emotion far more dangerous than rage: respect. He bowed his head, not in submission but in acknowledgement. Outside, the last echoes of the raiders' retreat faded into the trees. The cabin, battered but still standing, held within it something stronger than any fortress: trust forged in the crucible of desperation. The cub stirred once, churring softly before settling again, safe in her human guardian's care. Reltar turned toward the door, his voice low but certain. "They will not return. Not after tonight. Word will spread. They saw what I saw." Elias leaned back in his chair, exhaustion tugging at him, but his eyes remained sharp. "Then let it spread." The night drew in closer, heavy with the promise of change. What had begun as a fight for survival had become something greater, a lesson written not in blood but in trust. And though the forest was quiet now, both man and predator knew the true test had only just begun. The night was restless in the camp, not because of enemies but because of anticipation. The predators had chosen their course, and the humans had agreed to share in its danger. The cubs were asleep in makeshift nests beside the firelight, small chests rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Leon watched them with a mix of awe and responsibility carved into his face. Every choice they had made had led here, to be trusted with the most sacred bond any predator could offer. And now, that trust was about to be tested beyond what anyone could have imagined. Draven had been scouting the perimeter, his long rifle cradled in his arms, but he returned with news that tightened every jaw around the fire. "They've moved," he said in a low growl. "The hunters are coming, not just one pack. They're driving everything before them." Silence gripped the camp until one of the predators, scarred from countless battles, rumbled in his throat. "They want the cubs. They think taking them will break us." His words were more than anger, they were prophecy. Leon rose, his frame taut as steel. "Then we don't let them near. If the galaxy needs to know why predators trust humans, tonight is the proof. We will stand not just for ourselves but for your future." He looked at the cubs, then back at the predators. "No one touches them. Not while we breathe." The predators shifted, their golden eyes reflecting the firelight, and in those eyes there was no doubt. They had seen humans fight before, but never with their children lying so close, never with something as primal as this to protect. When the hunters came, they came in silence, fanning through the trees, armored and sure of themselves. They expected fear. They expected desperation. What they met was Draven's rifle cracking like thunder, dropping the first hunter before his boots touched the clearing. Then Leon's voice rang out, clear and commanding, slicing the night. "Form the line." Humans and predators moved as one. Claws scraped the dirt as massive bodies crouched beside armed men. The hunters hesitated for only a breath, but in war, a breath is enough. The defenders surged forward, not to scatter, but to collide as a wall of defiance. The battle was brutal. Leon fought with a spear scavenged from the ruins of an outpost, every thrust fueled by a need greater than survival. Beside him, a predator larger than any beast he had ever seen tore through an enemy, but instead of pressing the attack, it wheeled back, shielding the cubs with its massive bulk. Draven was methodical, his rifle never wasting a shot. Each squeeze of the trigger bought another heartbeat for those behind him. His calm precision contrasted with the savagery of their allies, yet it blended seamlessly into the rhythm of survival. But the hunters were not easily turned. More poured from the treeline, their weapons flashing with cruel efficiency. Leon felt the press tightening, his muscles burning, his lungs screaming, but retreat was unthinkable. He caught Draven's eyes for just a moment across the chaos, and no words were needed. Both men understood that this was not simply about winning, it was about proving something eternal. The predators felt it too. They stopped fighting as individuals and began moving like the humans, covering each other, shielding the cubs, striking in calculated rhythm rather than frenzy. It was alien to their instincts, but it worked. Then came the warlord. Larger than the rest, armored in dark plates, his weapon crackling with stolen energy, he strode into the melee with cruel certainty. His gaze fell on the cubs and every defender felt it like a knife. Leon moved to intercept, his body screaming in protest, but the warlord swatted him aside with a blow that rattled bone. The predator beside Leon roared, leaping to defend, only to be brought down in a shower of sparks and blood. Draven's rifle barked, rounds sparking off the warlord's armor, but the giant advanced still, raising his weapon for the final strike. It was then the cubs cried out, not in fear but in defiance, a sound so raw that every predator froze. That was their future screaming at extinction, and it was unbearable. Leon staggered to his feet, his vision blurred, but his will unbroken. He hurled his broken spear, a desperate throw. It struck not with power but with purpose, slipping into a joint in the armor, staggering the warlord. The predators lunged as one, not beasts but kin. They struck together, claws and fangs tearing at weakened seams, holding the giant in place long enough for Draven to line his last shot. He took a breath, whispered, "For them," and pulled the trigger. The warlord fell, shaking the earth. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of fire and the whimpers of the cubs. The hunters broke, retreating into the dark, unwilling to face a line that had not only held but had fused predator and human into something unbreakable. Leon collapsed to his knees, blood running down his side, but he smiled through the pain. The cubs toddled toward him, nuzzling against his chest as though sensing his exhaustion, offering comfort where none should have been. Draven pulled him up, steady and grim but alive, his hand firm on his brother's shoulder. The predators gathered around, and their leader, scarred and wise, spoke words no human had ever heard before. "Our kind has fought alone for ages. Tonight we learn we do not need to. Tonight, the cubs of predators lived because humans stood beside them. We will remember. Leon met his eyes, and despite the blood and the ruin, he felt no fear, only purpose. Then let the galaxy learn the same lesson. If even predators trust us with their cubs, nothing else should doubt it either. The stars glittered above, silent witnesses to the bond forged in fire and blood. Humanity had once been seen as fragile, reckless, temporary. But this night rewrote that belief in the hearts of the fiercest creatures alive. And somewhere deep inside, as Leon sank down between the cubs and Draven kept watch on the dark horizon, he realized that trust was the sharpest weapon of all, because it made them family. The camp did not sleep again that night, but it did not matter. The cubs slept soundly, wrapped in warmth and trust, while the galaxy shifted, unaware that its predators had chosen their allies forever.